Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video for the channel. I hope you're doing well and welcome back. I know I look a little bit fucked up today, but I just woke up. Honestly, I'm just trying my best to deliver, well, at least one video a week, and this is the result of it. It's me just out of bed trying to record a video. Today I wanted to talk about this pretty outdated theme. Honestly, I saw this Anthony Fantano video where he was talking about Quincy Jones' quote on the Beatles. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, basically a few years ago, the legendary composer, songwriter, and record producer Quincy Jones said that the Beatles were the worst musicians on the planet or something similar. Basically arguing that when it came to, recording on the studio, the Beatles were one of the most disastrous band he's ever witnessed. Because of this comment, there were a lot of people, angry about it and just debating over the fact that the Beatles may or may not be the worst musicians on the planet. And I think that a lot of people misunderstood what Quincy Jones wanted to say, and I think that a lot of people missed the point here. He basically said that the Beatles were the worst musicians ever, not really artists, so a lot of people don't really know how to separate the two. For example, I think no one would be angry if I said that George Harrison isn't the best vocalist ever, right? I think that we can agree on it. The same thing with John Lennon. I think we can all agree that John Lennon doesn't really, he's not really a good vocalist. I don't think that anyone would argue that John Lennon, in terms of like vocal performance and technical ability, is a good singer. I don't think anyone would argue that George Harrison is one of the best guitarists in the history of rock and roll, rock music, psychedelic music, you call it. He's not really in any top 20 I've ever seen, and rightfully so. He wasn't really a standout guitarist in the Beatles. Actually, the most impressive and celebrated things he did in the Beatles was as a songwriter, not really as a guitarist. Actually, the only thing you need to do to prove Quincy Jones right is go and buy the deluxe edition of any Beatle album that actually has a deluxe edition. For example, go to For the White Album. There's so much outtakes and demo tapes and just take 1, take 2, take 200 of a song, for example, like Obla Obla Da, and you can tell how rubbish and unfinished most of it sound. And I know a lot of people would like to argue, well, they're demo tapes, they're not finished, so they're meant to sound like that. It's just the process of creating a song. But not really. Most of these takes were when the song was already finished. They were just trying to record the track. And of course, any band in the history of music has a bunch of outtakes that didn't go well and they were thrown in the bin. That's perfectly normal. But what I'm trying to argue is that it was really complicated for the band to polish what the idea they had in mind and put it into the studio, which is what Quincy Jones argued. Obviously they were geniuses when it comes to creating music, which in my opinion is the hardest part. Creating something out of nothing and putting it on a piano, on a guitar, on your voice is really, really hard. Giving birth to a song, for me, it's way harder than actually performing the track. You only need to go as far as to see an album like Live in Toronto, the 1969 release from John Lennon, which is a live album, to tell that when it comes to performing these tracks, John Lennon doesn't really know how to. Actually, the Beatles are one of those weird occasions where I like the studio recordings. They're some of my favorite albums ever, and actually have, include my favorite album ever in the history of music, but I don't like the live performances. I just don't enjoy them. And I'm not really talking about like the 1964, 1965 performances, because it is true that it's really hard to enjoy a fucking song when thousands and thousands of girls are screaming constantly and just blocking all the fucking sound. Now, it is true that I have praised John Lennon's ability to perform a track multiple occasions, but when I have done that, it's mostly because of how much emotion and how much passion he puts into the performance, not really for the performance itself. If you see an album, for example, like Double Fantasy, the stripped version where they take a lot of the layers and overdubs in the original album, and they strip that away, and you have like a boneless album. You can tell that in songs like Just Like Starting Over, Woman, or Beautiful Boy, he's not really hitting those notes as he's supposed to. I'm not saying that the songs are bad or his performance is bad. It's just that if you go to a to an actual musician like Quincy Jones is, and you put this on his table, he's obviously going to tell you off and is obviously going to point out these problems. With Paul, I don't really know if I would say he's a bad musician. Honestly, he's a multi-instrumentalist. He can play the drums, and we can see that he does that pretty well in tracks like Back in the USSR. He can play the bass, and he's really good at it, really good tempo, and he can play the guitar, especially the acoustic guitar. He really does know how to play it, so I wouldn't really know why he would say that about Paul. And as a vocalist, Paul McCartney is amazing. He is wonderful, especially in the 70s when his voice was, peak. It was amazing. Listen to an albums like Wings Over America, and you can see the best version of many of his Wings and Beatles tracks, because Paul McCartney was an amazing, and still is to this day, an amazing performer. With that being said, I can say that I do agree with Quincy Jones in the idea that the Beatles are not the best musicians in the world, but I disagree that they were the worst. And I disagree with anyone who would take that statement from Quincy Jones and would use it to say that the Beatles overall, they were overrated, and to maybe just diminish the legacy of an album like Sgt. Pepper's, The White Album, Abbey Road, Revolver, Rubber Soul. As I said previously on the video, I think that creating the music from nothing, it requires far more talent than, performing it. Because, yeah, performers are really talented people and are, obviously deserve all the praise in the world. I do agree that being in a jazz band and staying on tempo requires a lot of talent and a lot of practice. But they wouldn't have anything to perform if it weren't for the person that wrote or composed the track. And with the Beatles, even though obviously the recording sessions were not the most professional recording sessions ever, we do have the finished product, and the finished product is still one of the most innovative, groundbreaking, and fucking incredible albums ever made. Maybe George Harrison needed 49 fucking tracks to make something, but he still made something, one of the most beautiful songs ever. Maybe John Lennon made 100 fucking mistakes while performing Come Together, but he still completed the track, and it's still an amazing track. Maybe Paul McCartney took forever to record a Blackbird the way he wanted to record a Blackbird, but he still recorded Blackbird. It doesn't really matter the amount of attempts that it took them to do so. The fact is that they did it. They completed the song, and the songs are fucking incredible. What I'm trying to say is that, yes, Quincy Jones may have a point. The Beatles are not the best musicians in the world, but they definitely crafted and had the genius to create the best discography of all time. And nothing, it doesn't really matter if tomorrow someone says that Paul McCartney was actually lip syncing most of the times. Nothing will take away the fact that they created something that is timeless and it's fucking amazing. And when it comes to Ringo, I know I haven't said that much about him, but you have to give Ringo some credit, because the Beatles were one of the most groundbreaking, innovative, and one of the bands that was breaking the mold in the 60s, and Ringo managed to adapt to every single style that Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and John Lennon brought to the table, and that's a lot. For the most part, he did an amazing job, and he managed to keep up with the best band of all time, and that deserves a lot of praise, in my opinion. That'll be it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed. I want to know your opinion. Do you really think that the Beatles were the worst musicians in the world? And if they were, how does this affect their legacy? Do you think that the fact that they couldn't perform these songs live as good as they performed in the studio recordings, or as good as they sound in the studio recordings, ruined their legacy or their credibility as one of the best artists of all time? What do you think? I want to hear your opinion, so leave it down below in the comments and I'll make sure to check that one out. You can also leave a comment if you want me to review a specific artist, or if you want me to review a specific album, or if you want me to talk about a certain topic. I'm more than glad to hear your request and fulfill it as soon as I can. So yeah, with that being said, once again, I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that I can see you guys soon with a new video. But until then, bye.